regardless of what the product is. If the consumers want it and there's a marketplace for it, the history just across the globe screams that there'll be products available for consumers.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello, vapers. Welcome to a new episode of Vaping Unplugged, the Vapers Alliance podcast where we talk about vaping, tobacco harm reduction, and everything related to it. And our guest today is Jeffrey Smith. He's a resident senior fellow at the R Street Institute's harm reduction team. And we're going to talk about vaping flavors, their importance for smoking cessation. So tune in for a very interesting podcast. And thank you for joining us, Jeffrey. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thank you for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
Thank you. We're very happy to have you here. And before we dive into vaping flavors, I wanted to ask you if you can tell us a bit more about the R Street Institute, what it is, what you guys do, and what you focus on there.
Sure. The R Street Institute is a policy house in the United States, and we're focused on providing guidance and information around different policy approaches across the gamut. We do everything from obviously harm reduction through insurance and technology, and really trying to find ways to influence policymakers so they apply the right level of regulatory oversight in terms of how our lives are impacted in the United States on a day-to-day basis. And right level is right level, and everybody has lots of different definitions for what the right level is. But for us, it really is allowing for the consumers and citizens of the United States to be able to have more control over their day-to-day life, while still at the same time having the appropriate level of protections in place to ensure for public health and public safety and so forth. And so I think it's a very interesting organization. I've been with R Street for just about a year now, and I think especially in the harm reduction space, the ability to navigate the complexities of it all, especially when you're dealing with diverse ideas around harm reduction, whether it's harm reduction related to opioid drug use, to sexual health and tobacco, very different areas in terms of how we think about it in general, but really focused on the key factors of providing support for people to have options to improve their quality of life, regardless of what behaviors they choose to engage in. And I think that's where tobacco harm reduction really falls in the center of the conversation. You know, I don't necessarily feel comfortable telling anybody what they should or shouldn't do in terms of their own personal choices and personal health, but to be able to have conversations about ways to potentially decrease risks associated with different behaviors, to educate them, to provide them with clear information and guidance, and let them make the decisions and choices that best suit their needs in their lives.
Amazing. We're going to leave the links to the R Street Institute website, social media, and also to Jeffrey's social media, so you all can follow their work and what they do. And now let's talk about flavors in nicotine products, but mainly on vaping. And I wanted to start with you by trying to debunk, or let's see how much of truth there is in this, I would say, myth. And this is the idea that many people have, that vaping flavors are oriented towards underage or young people, and that this is only a sort of a marketing idea. How much of truth there is on this? Are flavors for young people, or also they commonly used by adults?
Well, when you ask the question like that, I'm going to say flavors are important for everyone. In terms of if we separate them from the construct of the use of ends products, flavors are so important to maintaining our day-to-day lives. We could not even think about it. And so it's very quickly I can debunk the marketing side of it. It's not a factor that's simple as putting a label on something to draw your attention or your eye to it. It's really the experience that you have with not just a flavored product, but the experience you have with flavor over your lifespan, but even beyond that, over generations through uh, the how interacting with the external world influences changes in our genetic code. So if you when you think about the most basic way of thinking about flavor, it's kind of we you know it's kind of a hedonistic approach. A lot of people think about flavor just simply as I like something or I don't like something. And if I like something more, I'm going to be more attracted to that. I'm going to use that product, whatever the case may be, more often than I would of a product that I don't enjoy as much. And so, of course, this applies to kids, underage individuals, as it does adults, and really any species on the planet. So when we think about flavor as a question of whether or not it is directed toward a group or not, within whether it's age or ethnicity or whatever the case may be, you really need to dig down a little deeper. I would argue that, again, this is my personal perspective. I'm sure there's lots of adults that enjoy, SpongeBob SquarePants. But there's younger folks that are attracted to that type of materials as well. That's marketing information, and there might be questions around that in terms of who the manufacturers are actually building that product for. But when we talk about the difference between grape and something bland like, I don't know, rice. I'm just making things up here. You really can't talk about that in terms of a flavor being something that's specifically geared toward a kid versus an adult. Even more interesting names such as a Tutti Frutti or a bubble gum, if it describes the product well enough to get an adult consumer to try it and they have preference for it, I think that's really in the responsibility lies within the manufacturers to ensure that they're giving descriptive names to their products to inform the consumer, not necessarily to draw a consumer. So I don't know if I've answered the question well enough. It's important for all of us that flavors are especially when it comes to constructs like we're discussing today, that the information around flavors are informative and the right flavors are in the marketplace to attract individuals that smoke to try something different and then prefer that flavor over, say, the traditional tobacco flavor that you would have in a combustible product.
Yeah, I think you responded to it. I very much agree that flavors are important for everyone. Of course, they are important for adult users, also for those underage, and that's obviously a big concern. And since you brought up the issue around the names of the products, the naming, there has been in some places like Norway, the United Kingdom, the idea to ban some or regulate the way these products are named or the way the flavors are named, not to target underage users or kids. Do you think this is a good policy? Do you think this is something that could work?
I think in terms of keeping products out of the hands of underage individuals, I think it's really challenging to do that through product development and design, because there's always a balance point between building a product that is going to meet the needs of your consumer and having that as a priority, and having that message appear to someone who may not be in the situation when they're using those or have experience with those type of products, interpreting what that means. So if I see a product that we could talk about a mango flavor. How do you define mango as being an adult flavor versus a youth flavor? It becomes very difficult to do so, and especially in the United States, where there's protections around how and what type of language you can use. It'd be very hard for a category or a word that is going to be defined as being an adult-only word versus a youth targeted word. I think what's really what at least what our hopes are in the United States is that if you have concerns with underage individuals getting access to product, you put different products, you put laws onto the books to put gates in front of the the youth to make it very difficult for them to get their hands on that product. And since the establishment of Tobacco 21 in the United States, that requires that retailers check age and do age verification to ensure that the individual purchasing the product is over the age of 21. We've seen a couple changes in terms of the use of all tobacco and nicotine products in the United States. The numbers have dropped, and so instead of thinking about the question in terms of the product and the characteristics of the product itself, if you're going to say that this isn't an age-appropriate product for anyone under the age of 21, put laws into place to put barriers in front of them to keep them from getting access to the product or easy access to the product, and then allow for the manufacturers to build products that are going to help those that are interested in using nicotine products move away from products that could cause health problems, such as the use of combustible cigarettes and other combustible products, to encourage them to move to the lower risk products, such as ENDS products and heat not burn products and oral products. So flavor is very powerful in helping the adults make that transition. I've heard stories from lots of consumers that have said that they really didn't even have an intention to quit. They tried a product, an ENDS product, and they just liked it. And they just realized one day that they were using that product and they weren't smoking anymore. And that's really how powerful flavor can be. If something is reinforcing and more rewarding than a combustible product, then to make that shift is a relatively easy shift to make. And that's why the power of flavor and the importance of flavor really shouldn't be marginalized. There's too many accounts of this natural transition that exists in the consumer marketplace for people to ignore. It's a very powerful tool, and flavor is a very powerful tool in terms of changing behavior.
Right. We have always talked about the importance of flavors in smoking cessations when adults try to switch from smoking to a less harmful alternative. And this is, I think, because they are more rewarding in terms of the way the adults enjoy the product and the flavor, but also is because they allow smokers to forget about the flavor of traditional cigarettes, right? How does this work out? How does this happen, and how does it increase the likelihood of smokers successfully switching and quitting?
Sure. I'm a behavioral neuroscientist by training. And so I spent the first 25 years of my career really trying to understand the influence that our external world has on our brain and how it changes how our brain functions. It was in the context of neuroplasticity. So different behaviors like exercise or diet or whatever the case may be, how do those different factors impact how the brain functions and changes over time? And so when you think about that type of question, it really brings to the forefront the importance of understanding how we think about our day-to-day activities. There are so many ways that we interact with the world. And all those different type of experiences we have as we interact with the world, we don't really think about making decisions about them. We just kind of make decisions about them. The brain is processing information, if you will, in the background. And depending on how those choices and decisions pan out, the brain will be able to make those decisions more effectively in the future. And so if I stop talking about the big world of behavior and focus on what we're talking about today, flavor is one of the levers that we have that our body's been tuned to pay attention to. If something tastes really, really bitter or sour, we're programmed that may not be something that we should eat. There could be some risks associated with it. And so we don't take a whole bunch of it in at once. We'll try a little bit. And if we get sick or whatever, we learn very quickly not to eat that product or ingest that particular foodstuff, plant, whatever the case may be. It could be sour meat. It could be meat that's turning bad. trying to protect ourselves by paying attention, our brain paying attention to those cues. And it's extraordinarily powerful. There's a phenomenon known as the Garcia effect, where it only takes a single trial, one experience, for you to develop an aversion to a flavor or to a product, because you got sick almost immediately afterwards. And again, I could lecture on this for an hour or two, and I'm going to try not to. So, but if you're interested, Google Garcia effect, because it's extraordinarily interesting phenomena. Because usually, when we think about behavior, it takes multiple trials multiple experiences before something comes locked in. With Garcia, and again, it's almost always associated with the ingestion of food. It becomes very important. But when we think about flavor as a means of changing behavior around smoking, when people experience and smoke early on, there's lots of different characteristics of the product. It's the heat, the temperature of the smoke, it's the way it feels in your mouth and throat. It's the smell and the flavor associated with the product that all very quickly start to be used by your brain to kind of evaluate what's going on in the world around you. And if you're using this product and there's a lot of good things that are going on in the world around you, very quickly those sensory characteristics become associated with those good things. And that's one of the power in terms of smoking dependence comes from, and why sometimes it's very, very difficult to quit, is because you've associated all these really positive things in your life with the act of smoking a cigarette. If we bring in a reduced risk product like an ENDS product, and it doesn't have all those same characteristics or similar characteristics or stronger but different characteristics, then it's not going to be as rewarding as and have those same positive attributes, experiential attributes, as the cigarette that you were smoking prior carried for you. And so it becomes really important. If I have a product that I don't enjoy more, and I can't associate that positive feeling to equally or strongly to the new product, it becomes a situation where it's less likely for that alternative reduced risk behavior to be maintained. And so, I've heard some argue that flavored products should be limited to a handful of flavors, and either mimic tobacco flavor or be very dull and very bland in terms of flavor, to try to keep it from being something that's attractive to either non-smokers or non-nicotine product users, or again those in those age gated groups, and that really defeats the whole purpose. It makes it less likely that consumers will make that not just that choice to switch, but give them the type of feedback that the brain needs in order to make that switch and that switch stick. And so in that case, when we think about it in terms of as a behavioral cue, manufacturers have built products that are popular with consumers, but in that popularity, it carries the power with it to change the behavior, to move individuals from smoking to adopting and switching completely to the reduced risk products that are on the marketplace. And so there's a balance here that manufacturers are trying to make in terms of making sure the product is attractive enough to have the power to switch and change behavior. But at the same time, they're dealing with regulatory agencies that are arguing that when they make products that are too attractive and are in a sense, designed in order to help individuals make that transition by having really a wide variety and of different types of flavor characteristics. The regulatory agencies see that as, maybe they're using that to attract either non-nicotine product users or individuals in these protected age groups into the product category. So it's a really hard, when you think about behavior, it's it's something we experience every day because we produce behavior, but it's so complicated that it's really hard for individuals to understand it beyond trying to reduce it to the least complex aspect of it. And when you do that, you start to muddle in terms of how you can actually use these tools to help people improve their health.
Regarding about behavior, I wanted to ask you, because the same way that it has a public health benefit, the way you said that they are crucial, or they have a big role in smokers quitting, they are also attractive for non-smokers. They are also attractive for children. I mean, vaping flavors are. Um, but I wanted to ask you, do you think, as a behavioral neuroscientist, that vaping flavors are the main reason, or one of the main reasons behind youth vaping uptake, or is this just a casualty, in the sense that probably these young people that is vaping and is vaping using vaping flavors, if vaping flavors were not available or vaping did not exist, they would be just smoking or taking another risk behaviors.
Well, this is a very controversial topic to discuss, and in my perspective, the ideas behind harm reduction isn't something that is directed toward a certain and one and only age group. Harm reduction is across the lifespan, and so in the case of underage individuals, if they're going to engage in risky behavior, I would much rather them engage in a risky behavior that has less consequences in terms of their health, as compared to other behaviors that have more negative consequences as it relates to their health. And so it's really hard to simply say that harm reduction is something for adults only. When we look back to when Juul became popular, prior to Tobacco 21 becoming law, there were a lot of famous people talking about Juul and using Juul and talking about how cool. So societal influence was probably one of the stronger drivers of youth uptake than just wanting to access nicotine. And so you really can't talk about any single characteristic that was the reason or the cause for the increase of youth using products during the early 2010 to around 2019. There were a lot of variables and a lot of factors that led to that being. We saw seeing such a huge jump in the use of underage individuals getting access to these products. Now, if all those individuals were smoking cigarettes instead of using vape products, I think there would be even more of an uproar than what we experience. And in terms of long-term consequences, potential of much greater health risks associated with that. So I'm not going to say it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's a thing. It's what it was. Driving down to root causes in the United States right now, one of the primary reasons why underage individuals are still seeking out nicotine products is because they have stress and anxiety in their lives, and this is one product that they believe helps reduce that stress and anxiety. If nicotine products are the one product for the youth that actually is helping them deal with those problems, I'd much rather them use an oral nicotine product or a INS or a heated nicotine product as compared to a cigarette. But the law is the law, and it basically says now that you have to be over the age of 21 to purchase it in this country. And so at that point, it becomes really the responsibility of the caretakers of underage individuals to make sure that they're not engaging in activities that violate the law, and in a sense, monitoring their kids' behaviors to make sure that, again, we've seen the numbers drop, and it really isn't an outcome due to simple, public service announcements on television. It really is because retailers are responsible and they don't sell products to people that they're not allowed to sell products to. And that's really where we've seen the reduction in numbers. And so going forward, knowing that retailers are responsible individuals and they're not going to sell, I mean, we've seen that with alcohol in the United States, for decades, retailers have been selling alcohol products. And yeah, there's some people that will be over the age of 21 that will buy the product and give it to underage individuals. But that's a much smaller number than in younger individuals walking the store and having a retailer sell it to them and not card them and ensure that they're of appropriate age. I think having that mechanism in place in the United States really allows for the manufacturers and the retailers to work with the regulatory agencies to ensure that the products that they do provide to the consumer are both meeting the needs of the consumer and also fall within standards associated with what's considered an appropriate product for individuals to have access to. And I think in the long run in the United States, the science has grown to the point where the literature really is starting to show that flavor is a key tool in terms of helping people move away from smoking. And eventually the regulatory agencies will have to pay attention to that and understand that if we want to reduce the deaths and disease associated with the use of combustible tobacco products, we need to get the right products into the marketplace, into the hands of consumers, so that they can make the choices for their health and improve their health over the lifespan. If we want to see those numbers drop.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that it's clear that every time vaping sellers are more responsible in the sense that they don't sell the products to underage users. And still, I believe that underage vaping is never going to be a 100% met goal, in the sense that there's always going to be someone willing to give a vape to a minor after he has bought it legally, or somebody's going to find ways to do this, and that's an idealized goal. But in some other countries, instead of applying measures like those applied in the US, or strong age verification processes, like shop licensing, wherever, such as is my case in Spain, there's now a current proposal to ban vaping flavors. And this is something that you have had a lot of experience with in the United States. I think there's also a lot of research. So how do you think this will play out, or how do you think this is playing out also in other European countries in which vaping flavors are banned? What do you expect to happen?
So whether this is my downfall or my most positive trait, it depends on really perspectives. But I'm a scientist to my core. When my wife and I have arguments, I use scientific debate and scientific data to try to support me, and she'll just yell at me and walk out of the room. But that's really my answer for everything. Is that as a scientific, the data starts to accumulate month over month, year over year, and scientists really start to produce studies that start to look at the different factors that impact individual choice as it relates to your health, and flavor is one of those factors. Eventually, the medical community, the public health community, the regulatory agencies, regardless of country or location, will have to pay attention to the science. It's not like it's a small problem. Globally, nearly 8 million people die because of long-term use of combustible products. It's not nicotine. There's nothing in a sense that is risky for individuals that are not pregnant, and are through those very, very challenging developmental stages. When I say development, it's brain development was really what I focus on. So when you look at the science, eventually regulatory and public health and medical opinions have to be malleable enough to read the science and realize that maybe their initial perspectives and thoughts, based on whatever biases they had at that point, have to change as the science is presented. And so it's not unfortunately, science is slow, and things don't happen super quickly. But over the last few years, we've started to see papers that have come out that have shown not only does the ends products help people make the transition from combustion, but flavored ends products do so at a level that is greater than if you were just using a bland or a tobacco flavored product for people that are attracted to those particular type of flavors. So that's why I think it's really important is that there's not one flavor that's the right flavor. There's not one type of ends product that's the right ends product. There needs to be lots of options and choices, and the same flavors that might work well in the United States won't work well in India. It really does have to be something similar to what you see in I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I remember going to the World of Coca-Cola, and the World of Coca-Cola is a museum that's dedicated to Coca-Cola. But when you walk through the museum at the very end, they have soda fountains set up with flavors from across the world. And I walked up to one flavor from, I don't know, somewhere in Turkey, and it was disgusting to me, but it was the most popular flavor in Turkey because that's what that particular culture has been exposed to across their entire lives and beyond. So it really becomes something where to really dig into the importance of cultural appropriate, genetic appropriate, and having the options and choices available if we really want to solve the problems associated with the death and disease attributed to the use of combustion products. Then we really need to think about not what do we limit, but how do we open it up so that we're both protecting the consumer, but also allowing the consumer the best chance of making that transition to a smoke-free life.
And also, don't you think that these policies, bans in general, but vaping flavor products bans, usually have very negative unintended consequences? I don't know. Well, there are some studies in the United States, for example, I think Massachusetts or San Francisco, about how this led to an increase in cigarettes sold and young smoking. But in Europe, and especially in Latin America, Asia, Africa, other parts of the world, law enforcement is not as strong in the US, and this lead to huge black markets, unsafe products being sold there to minors. So
we learned pretty quickly in the United States when you ban things that consumers want, consumers will find a way to get them. And if there's a market where people can make money getting consumers access to products that they want, they'll take advantage of it. And so the question becomes, does that marketplace need to be regulated? And if the particular government thinks that it should be, then they have to take that into consideration. Whether it's a flavor ban, whether it's a nicotine limit, regardless of what the product is, if the consumers want it and there's a marketplace for it, the history just across the globe screams that there'll be products available for consumers, and that becomes more of a concern of now criminal justice. Now you're turning consumers into active participants in criminal behavior, and nobody really wants that when it's just trying to seek a personal need, a solution to a personal need. So I think just like everything else, there's the right balance. And with a relatively new product category, we have centuries of experience with combustible cigarettes. We have decades of experience with ends products. And as you think about the novel products that have come since, really trying to understand the impact of these products on the consumer base has been challenging because you just don't have that long of a history with it. But we do have modern toxicological research methods that we didn't have, 50, 60, 70 years ago, where we can evaluate the safety of those products in a very different way than people evaluated the safety of cigarettes back in the 50s and earlier, that clearly indicate that these products carry less risk with them. And if the consumers can work with their governments to determine where they want to put the barriers in place, and then the manufacturers have the rules in front of them and they know what they need to do in order to effectively navigate the place. And here's the other aspect about regulation that a lot of folks really don't understand as being a positive. With new products, sometimes there's new products that might cause a problem. Nobody could have predicted EVALI, and there wasn't a mechanism in place, so it became a huge scare for end users. And EVALI had nothing to do with ends products. It was vape THCs, but there wasn't a mechanism in place to quickly get to that answer. And so the news and organizations made a big deal out about this new vaping disease, as if it was nicotine products, not the vitamin E acetate that was in the THC liquids. If you have a well-regulated market, if something does go wrong, very quickly those products can be traced. If you don't have a well-regulated market and it's a marketplace that's full of illicit product, if something were to go wrong, it would take much more time and much more effort to figure out what the source of that problem is. So there are good positive aspects of having a good regulatory program in place for products that are novel products. But I think it really does have to take on the kind of the balanced approach where we look at what the consumer is doing, and we build a regulatory structure around that to ensure that those choices can still be made by the consumer, and they're not looking elsewhere to find products that could lead to potential problems.
I think you are the first behavioral neuroscientist that we have in this podcast, and so I didn't want to close the podcast without asking you a question that I think we never could ask, which is, and we could talk about this for hours also.
Sure.
Like, if you can just summarize to us, what are the effects of nicotine in children, adolescents, or also in fetuses? What are the main effects in their brain development? Because I guess you have done some studying about it, and you know what happens.
Well, here is the best answer I can give. Now, again, this is taking a turn away from flavors, but I'll do my best. In terms of fetal development, really any level of development, we've evolved over eons in terms of and have survived, the developmental periods in our lives over eons, eating, natural foods, drinking water, and teas. And really when you deviate from a healthy diet, then you have questions in terms of what that particular deviation could cause as a problem. And so when I speak to individuals that are pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, friends and family or whatever the case may be, I put nicotine in the same category as alcohol and caffeine and everything else. Anything that is outside of a normal healthy diet, a natural healthy diet, could introduce risks. And so if you are wanting to decrease any particular risks associated with your child's development, and this is as a fetus and really until they get into their early and mid-teens, you really want to keep them free of exposure to caffeine and alcohol and anything that isn't just in a healthy diet. And I would put processed food and high fructose corn syrup and everything else that is a processed product into that category, which is really hard to do these days, right? But the more you eliminate things that are not part of a natural healthy diet, the greater the likelihood that the fetus is going to develop in a way that is normal. So I don't like to talk about causal relationships between, if everybody exposed to X amount of nicotine, this will be the problem, because the science isn't clear in that. But the more you expose a fetus or anything to something that's not part of a normal healthy diet, the greater the likelihood that a problem could arise. And that's really my best answer for that question. I think there's, I can look at rodent studies where they give high doses and you see problems, severe problems, in the laboratory. Doesn't always directly translate to what we see in humans. And there's some folks that have talked about, especially in young adults, that there might be positive characteristics of nicotine. I won't argue that either, because it still falls within that developmental space. It really is the right choices for individuals. Really comes down to, how can I keep my body as clean as possible to allow for my child to have the best chance at a healthy developmental process, is really the key advice that I give.
Of course, I know it's a big
there's a recent study that has come out that if the mother's a smoker, moving from smoking cigarettes to using an ENDS product increases birth weight and improves the likelihood of survivability. And so there is some science out there that making that transition, if you're a smoker to a reduced risk product, if that's the only change in behavior that they can make, they can't quit the use of nicotine products altogether, then making those decisions are better than continuing to smoke. So whether or not that is the best possible environment for the child to grow within isn't really the argument at that point. At that point, the argument is, of the two options, is there one that's less potentially harmful for the fetus? And moving from smoking to an ENDS product scientifically now has been shown that is a better option for the mother to make.
That's harm reduction.
Yeah. Harm reduction.
I know it's a big term from vaping flavors, which was the main topic in our conversation, but I really didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask you about that. Thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us, and it was a pleasure to listen to you, and we hope to have you soon here.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to chat with you again. Thank you all.
Thank you. And thank you everyone that's watching us, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.